Well, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, whatever time you're listening to this. I have a great pleasure this morning for our regular member slot to be joined by Philip Grindell. Good morning, Philip.
Good morning, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Yourself?
Very well.
Good. I really appreciate your time. I know it's precious to you, so I really appreciate you joining us this morning. I'm going to go straight into it, Philip. You've got a fascinating career to date. I'm always a bit biased, but we're both ex-cops and ex-police, so it's great to talk to you a bit about that side of your career. But you've had a fascinating career in policing. Perhaps maybe just talk me through some highlights through your service that you did, and sort of what ended your service, or what did you end up doing at the end of your service?
Yeah, okay, good. Well, thank you for the opportunity. I'm delighted to be here. I started off as we all did in those days, walking the beat around well, actually from Bow Street Police Station, which was the first ever police station. Yeah. Now no longer, but so that's where I started. Then I moved to Brixton. I spent about 5 or 6 years there working on crime squad there, robbery squad, and then I kind of moved into sort of specialist policing. Was on murder squads for 8 or 9 years, the Damalola Taylor inquiry, and then also did the first 4 Trident murders before it became Trident. So we had a series of murders, which one just started off being called Operation Trident, and then we had another one and another one. And before we knew it, I think we were on Trident 5 or something, when they decided let's form a squad called Trident. So we did that right at the beginning, which was really interesting and quite scary, because it was a lot of, in those days, it was a lot of Max Air machine pistols and what have you. Then I moved from there I got recruited to go into Special Branch. And it was an interesting time at that time, because it was just before 7/7. So I then had the honour, I suppose, during 7/7 and all that period, of being the one of 2 officers that was deployed into the new team set up, which was a joint MI5, MI6 team, and me and one other. And I was the acting DS at that time. And we were recruiting and running agents here and abroad for the intelligence services. So that was fascinating, as you can imagine, for 3 or 4 years. And then I got promoted, went back, and I was did domestic violence inquiries and crime squad again. And then I worked my way up. I was on a child abuse team for about 4 or 5 years. Got promoted again, and I ended up then. I went to Westminster for 3 years, was a DI there for robbery, burglary, and I was acting DCI for pretty much everything. And then 2016, Joe Cox gets killed. And Neil Basu, who was head of counter-terrorism at the time, called me in and said, we need you to go in and set up a team, a dedicated team for MPs to stop the next attack. Investigate all the abuse and threats and everything else that's going on, and develop the national intelligence picture, because we just really didn't have a clue what was going on at the time. But that was where I finished my career. Spent 4 years there, all the way through the very hostile Brexit years, up to the general election when Theresa May got in, I suppose it would have been, and that's when I retired.
Fascinating. I'm assuming you weren't one of the original Bow Street runners, because you're far too young.
Wasn't the originals, not quite.
But yeah, I mean, it's now a museum, I believe. I think hotel and a museum there. Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
very nice.
So yeah, still worth a visit, I'm sure. So yeah, I mean, you mentioned Joe Cox, the sad murder of her, and that kind of really, certainly to my memory anyway, being outside of that world, was the sort of first real kind of realization that there was some serious threats to our members of Parliament. Or more regular than I'd have maybe assumed there was. So when you and your team were brought into there, was there any challenges that you faced within? It's obviously quite a prestigious organisation, some very important people in government. Any challenges that you faced as a police officer trying to run that team?
Well, one of the challenges was they all think they're very important people, and they often think the rules don't apply to them. I mean, I think fundamentally what I did was I went in and I kind of sat back and looked at what we had and looked what we knew, it was quite clear we didn't know much. So I was completing a master's degree at the time in security management, and I flipped my dissertation to look at how are high-profile people targeted. So I had the good fortune to be taught really the methodology by the US Secret Service, and actually by the person who wrote the research for the US Secret Service, a guy called Richard Fine, and met, was introduced to some of the real luminaries in the US that were real experts at behavioural threat and assessments, and looking at how are high profile or public figures targeted. So I kind of brought that back, introduced that into our team, and we used that methodology. And it was that methodology that allowed me then a year later to identify the next attack, which was the attack on Rosie Cooper. And what had changed quite dramatically was two things. Since the beginning of the 21st century, or previous to the 21st century, if you like, we had terrorist groups attacking politicians. So the IRA would be the prime example. Post 2000, it's been almost exclusively lone actor attacks. And it's been a combination of extreme right-wing, Islamic, and one exception, which was a person who was a local constituent and had a very serious mental health breakdown. In fact, he actually killed an assistant and was unfit to stand trial. But we had this very changing picture. And the research I conducted, my master's, also identified the exact trend. So who was getting attacked, where were they getting attacked, and who by, and how it was going to happen. And that's how we stopped the one in 2017 with Rosie Cooper, which was National Action, who were going to kidnap and kill Rosie, and they were also going to kidnap and kill a police officer, or he was being investigated by. So we were very fortunate to do that. The challenges are you're working in an environment where you've got 650 people scattered around the country, all with different political persuasions. The Labour Party isn't the Labour Party. You've got the extreme left, the middle, the right, all bits of it. You've got some very powerful people who are very demanding. And unfortunately, some of them don't follow the rules. And equally, the greatest threat, even now, to politicians is their complacency. Because when something like Joe happens, or when the most recent attack happened in Southend-on-Sea, they all get very understandably focused on their security. But 2 weeks later, they've forgotten all about it. And they go back to, this won't happen to me. And so very often what happens is there's lots of processes around the protective security we put in place, which they just weren't following. And so that's the greatest problem we had, is trying to persuade people to actually listen to us and follow what the advice we were giving them.
Sure. Yeah, no, I can imagine it's very challenging. You've got a great backdrop to your Zoom account there. I can see the word diffuse, which I believe is your company now. Now your job is you work for yourself, you run a company. Maybe just talk me through what made you start that, what Diffuse Global is all about, please.
Well, it really started because of Rosie Cooper and what I was doing in Parliament, and I was getting approached at that point by lots of people and organisations to say, can you help us? We're getting threats, we're getting this, that and the other. And I was unable to do anything about it because I was contracted to work exclusively for Parliament. So it kind of made me recognise there was an opportunity there and a gap. As I say, I was due to retire. So really it was looking at, okay, what can we bring out of what I was doing in Parliament? Some of the real expertise we'd learned, some of the research that we brought in, how can we make that commercially available? And so that's what we did. And we started started Diffuse rather from Plate, which was the police team, and looking at providing protective intelligence, behavioural threat, security management to ultra high net worths, to public figures and to organisations. And we've adapted it quite a bit. So we're looking at, not just direct threats. We're looking at obviously reputational targeting. We're looking at workplace harassment and violence and how that works, and the four areas. So people often think workplace violence or workplace harassment is all to do with the workplace. Very often it's been brought in from outside. It's consumers. You're disgruntled consumers. You'll be aware of that. But equally, it can be an employee's domestic relationship that's coming to work because that's the place they know they're at. And of course, if it's not managed properly, that then can become an insider threat because that person becomes disillusioned. and they might become sloppy with following the practices, or they might just get malicious about, I'm going to get my own back on you. So we use behavioral profiling and behavioral threat to look at the behaviors that people do and the behaviors they change, which tell us that they're escalating. And we do it through proven methodology. So it's not just what you might think is kind of common sense. It's very research, very proven methodology. And it's around looking at people of concern. And you might have 20 people that you're looking at or you're worrying about, or you may not have the resources to do with all 20. But there's a good chance you don't need to. There's probably only one of them is actually going to escalate. And so what we're looking to do is to help our clients differentiate between the kind of Mr. Angry or Miss Angry and the Mr. Dangerous. And then, how do you then stop that person? How do you return to business as usual? I remember a recent client is a global company, head office in the UK, chief executive and others being targeted. And they said to me at one point, by one individual, this is our number one issue at work at the moment right now. Of all the meetings we have, we start with this one because our families are being threatened, we're being threatened. And so it takes over and it consumes everything. And our job was to identify whether there was a genuine threat and deal with it, and also return business as usual.
Sure. No, fascinating. Thanks for that, Philip. And you decided, I think you're a member of a few security associations, one of them being ASIS UK and our UK chapter here. Just talk us through briefly what made you decide to join ASIS UK, and what have you been involved in? I know you've spoken at one of our seminars, so maybe just sort of briefly talk about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I'm a member of one or two different organisations, and I joined one or two different ones at the outset, really to get a gauge of kind of what there was out there. Obviously, I came from a world where I was living in the shadows almost, in terms of a very low profile. No one really knew much about me. All of a sudden, I had to do the opposite and build a profile and build a network. And so, it was good to join ASIS because I met lots of other people in the industry, not necessarily in the same niche as me, but in the same industry. I met some people who were great at giving me advice around what might work, what wouldn't work, how to pitch things, where the market is, how to price things, where are opportunities, where you won't find opportunities. So a lot of it was meeting people, getting an understanding of the industry, and then getting opportunities, like you said, to present some of the work that we do to other members, so that we could educate them, show them that there was something out there that they may not be familiar with. That was a proven methodology and worked. And yes, it works for a terrorist to stop a terrorist, but it will also work to stop an employee causing problems or a hostile consumer or something. So it was a great opportunity to share our work, meet new people, and learn more about the industry.
Yeah, I think it was great to have you come and speak at the seminar, and certainly for me, and I know for many of our members, and you've mentioned it in this interview, is that you see the work that you did was obviously specialist in policing and particularly within the realms of Parliament, but to actually relate that to everyday life and organisations, I think many of our members didn't really get that link. And although there are slight differences, it was really interesting to see that actually, as you say, I think of my own organisation, most of the threats we deal with are the jilted ex-boyfriend or ex-girlfriend who's causing one of our employees problems, not actually employees on employees necessarily. So yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you.
You can use the behavioural management piece, behavioural assessment, exactly the same. And it's really under an understanding that it's not the world necessarily of forensic psychology and terrorism, etc. It works, it obviously is there, but it also works in the workplace. Sure,
no, absolutely. I knew I would run over time, because I always do. Just to sort of wrap up, really, is there briefly any kind of emerging threat that you see developing for maybe businesses? And then lastly, if you could go back in time and give your young self some advice, maybe when you first started that career as a Bobby on the beat, what would you go back and tell a young Philip Grindell to do differently? Or are you happy with how you sort of dealt with those first few years of your career?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll start with the first bit around, my sort of prediction of what's going to happen in the next 12, 18 months. And I think we're moving into almost a perfect storm. violence. And I think we're going to see some real issues in the workplace. And the reason I say that is the economy's we're all beginning to feel it now. You know, some of us last year were thinking, oh, it's not really affecting us. It's affecting everyone now. You've only got to look at Sales Navigator on LinkedIn to see how many companies are making redundancies and how many, you know, every day big business across the world is making people unemployed. And at the same time, we're now seeing other companies publishing huge profits they've made from this economic scenario we're in. So within those people that are losing their job, within that cohort, there will be individuals who are dangerous and who feel angry or a sense of grievance about the fact that I've lost everything and you're going on to make millions. That's not fair. And so we will see that because we've seen it before and it will happen again. And we will, I think, see more threats being made into the workplace or threats made at the workplace. And it's that importance about being able to decipher which ones are real and which ones are just noise. I think also we're going to see, you know, we've seen, I think the extreme right wing will grow again because we've got a person of colour in number 10. We've got the media, you know, profiling around immigration all the time. So that's going to be annoying them. Interestingly, I've spoken to a few MPs in the last week, all of whom are veterans, all of whom have been contacted by various people saying, how many people did you kill in Afghanistan? All because of what is reported that Prince Harry said. So I think we're going to see that. So I think we're going to see an increase in workplace issues and insider threat. So that's my prediction for the next 12 months or so. And I genuinely believe the behavioural threat way is the way forward to deal with that. In terms of what I would give myself advice, well, I joined the job at 24 because I was in the army before that. But I think I had a pretty good time. I think I made a decision when I first joined that I was going to have 10 years enjoying myself. And then, or the first half, so 15 years enjoying myself. And then I was going to see what I could get promoted by. And I think if I was going to do it again, I'd probably go for promotion earlier. I might not have done some of the sexy jobs. I might have done the jobs that are more commercially transferable. So for instance, if I was joining now, cyber is clearly a big subject. The job is very different to the one I joined. You know, the pension's different, everything's different. I think I was kind of the last people in, really got the best of it. But I think if I'd have joined, you know, look back at myself then, I just said, get yourself promoted sooner rather than wasting, you know, 15 years on having fun, which was great, but I think I could have got promoted 5-10 years earlier.
Yeah, sure. Well, listen, Philip, it's been great speaking to you. I think, as I said, you've had a fascinating career and a really successful career, and I wish you all the best of luck with Diffuse Global in the future as well. We're going to publish this video. We'll publish your details as well, and members can connect with you either via the ACES platform or directly. But really, thank you for your time, Philip.
Pleasure.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.